that's the reason why the overarching passion in the Bible of great spiritual leaders is that their ambition is that their character is going to be greater than the platform that they stand on.
Yeah, that's good. Yep.
And so that's what we mean by leader
Right.
development. Yeah.
Welcome to my Boulevard.
All right, we are here with my mentor, Dr. Crawford Loritts. He has been a man that I've loved and respect for many years. He doesn't even know when I first met him. I met him it was actually a mile and a half where I'm sitting right now at a conference called Impact that they was hosting here in Atlanta, Georgia. He was speaking at the Impact conference. And I just remember like never, because I'm a born again believer. I just came to know the Lord. I haven't been saved for many years at that time. But I just never saw just a man would speak with such authority, with such grace, with such passion, with such clarity. And it just like, and it was there that I was just like, I want to spend my life. I want to spend my life doing and being a part of full-time ministry. And so he had an influence back then as a college student, about to graduate, thinking about what I'm doing next. He had influence of Blueprint Church being here in Atlanta, Georgia. I remember we were debating on where we were going to go. And, we talked about a lot of different places, and I was, at the time stewarding over 30 people who were planning to move. And I remember talking to him and just asking like, all right, I don't think Atlanta. And he was like, no, let me tell you why Atlanta. And he's just talking. He just began to pour wisdom and share about why Atlanta was a good place. And not only that, he said that if one of the things that he was willing to do as a church when he was the pastoring Fellowship Roswell at the time, he was just like, and we'll be your sending church. We'll cover you guys. And so him and his elders were a significant part of our church. It was a significant part of Blueprint. As many times we went up, all of our elders went up to meet with his elders. He's seen my tears, all of the things. And before I know this is a long introduction because I got a lot of things that I have flowers that I can say to him. I do remember one time, and that's kind of what I do want to talk about a little bit. There was one time that I remember calling you. I don't know if you remember this, but I remember calling you. There was stuff that happened in my home, and some of my daughters, and and they had a sleepover, and some inappropriate stuff took place, and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? And you were one of the people that I called, and when you called, he was just like, it's okay, and he was just like, and you just gave me a piece that what was gonna happen wasn't gonna be permanent. It was a season, it was a time, it was a moment, and you just gave me such perspective that it helped me and has helped my parenting and shaped my parenting.
Praise God.
So I'm just very grateful for you, grateful for your ministry, grateful for your wife, grateful for your sons, your daughter, who I've gotten a chance to know, all of them. And so just thank you for being on the Boulevard. And I want to share your wisdom with the world that I'm in. So,
well, I feel like I'm listening to my eulogy with all those kind of things that you're saying.
Not yet. You got many more decades.
You got a little more road here.
Yes.
Always enjoy to hook up with you, man. It's just a privilege.
Yeah. And so, and that's really one of the things, is just wanting to talk. When I thought about just this idea of like leaving a legacy, right? Leaving a legacy, leaving a thing, like you are a father of kids that are in ministry, a father, that of kids who all love the Lord, right? All of just a strong, thriving marriage. You have what many pastors like me wish for, long for, that when 20 I'm 20 years in ministry, but when it comes to 40 years in ministry, like I yearn for that, especially in a time when you see so many people falling away, so many people stumbling, so many people walking away from the faith. This, like, first, I'm just personally, how have you kind of maintained just your integrity in that way?
Wow, there's a lot of questions there. First of all, let me just say this, and I don't mean to deflect the compliments or that kind of thing, but the truth of the matter is, I heard this many years ago. As parents, we tend to take too much blame when our kids make bad decisions and too much credit when they make good decisions. And the truth of the matter is, you can't guarantee how your kids are going to turn out. And those who say that they can, see. legalistic parents don't raise perfect children; they raise frustrated children.
Hmm.
And so you just have to live in the moment. And I think this whole idea of leaving a legacy, everybody's going to leave a legacy. So that's, you're going to leave one. The question is what kind,
Yeah.
and how's that going to work? If you're breathing and if you're related to somebody, you're going to influence them. And so finishing well is not a science. Finishing well means to live well until you finish.
Hmm.
It's a moment by moment thing, and it's not perfection. It's not perfection, but it is transparency. It is not being disingenuous. It is being honest about your shortcomings and about your failures, and it is humbling yourself before your children. Yeah, and it's that kind of thing. What your kids need to see is not a perfect picture of the destination, but an aggressive pursuit to the destination, if you
Yeah.
know what I mean.
Yes.
That's what they need to see. Um, Brian Brian said something in an interview. When I heard it, Brian is our oldest son. When I heard it, the tears filled my eyes. He said they were asking him about our relationship and how he's got involved in this kind of thing, and then he said, my dad wasn't perfect, but I remember his apologies more than I remember his sins.
Hmm.
And so I think the place to begin is in profound humility, realizing that you're going to screw up, but you got to own your stuff, and you got to model to your children what it really means to be humble and what it really means to repent. And it's the grace of God flowing through your life that marks them. But again, God has no grandchildren, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can't I mean, you can't guarantee how your kids are going to turn out, but you parent on your knees, and you keep bringing them to the Lord. And as long as there's breath, there's opportunity for change.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Like when you mentioned and you said he remembers your apologies. Well, like what would that look like? Would that be where you were clearly in the wrong? Would that be when he did something in response to you and you like what would that? Because sometimes you hear things like remember our apologies, but especially when you feel like what does that look like for you?
Well, when you screw up and you yell at them, and you kind of like I don't know of a parent that has not been um, too strong and reacted and said too much or disciplined out of anger and that kind of thing. You need to own it. And that's what it looks like. You
Yeah,
own it, man.
yeah,
And you don't excuse yourself, and you don't hide behind stuff like, well, I'm the man, I'm the parent, and you're the child. Well, everybody knows that, but what you have to do is own up to it. I mean, there are times there are times in which I came down strong on him about stuff that I knew I had him dead to rights, and only to find out that I was wrong.
yeah.
And now I was tempted to say, well, I may have been wrong about that, but I missed something over here, so it's going to,
It all balances out.
it all balances out. But what you have to do is just look him straight in the eye and say, hey, look, man, I'm wrong. Will you please forgive me?
Yeah. So now your kids are in the ministry or have been a part of the
Yeah,
ministry. Brendan, Brian. Like,
yeah, yeah.
so was this something that you talked about? Was this something that was intentional? Did you how did that come about? Did they just come out of the blue or what? How did that
Yeah,
happen?
well, this is just a number of things. First of all, the short answer is I never pushed him toward the ministry. Karen and I we never orchestrated that. We never, in fact, I would get them away from well-meaning Christians who would want to say, "Oh, I know you want to preach just like your dad." That's the stupidest thing in the world to say to a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid. And I didn't think either one of them were going to be pastors. I thought Brian, he always had deals going when he was a teenager and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I thought he was going to be a businessman or something. And Brendan, I thought was going to be my early retirement program because he was a phenomenal baseball player. I only come to find out that they they turned that down. I think God called them independently, and I never wanted them to do anything that they thought that I wanted them to do. I wanted them to be and do whatever God called them to do, and give them the freedom to do that, whatever that meant. And I'd be just as proud of them. Now, looking back, they would travel with me at various conferences and this kind of thing, and what have you. And I can see, looking in the rearview mirror, how this all developed. They would hang with me and hear me speak, and the response of the people and this kind of thing. And I think God was doing something independently in their hearts and lives. And so it's not totally surprising, as you look at how God orchestrated their development, that they would fall in line, you know,
Yeah. I
and do
think
this kind of thing. Yeah.
I think that's good, because I was going to ask you, may have not talked about it or did, but oftentimes when people are in ministry, the opposite is true. Like, they resent the ministry,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
despise the ministry because it takes dad or mom away
Yeah.
from them. You know, and so were there any things that you did intentionally so that they did not despise the ministry?
Yeah. You know, I think the key to Karen is huge in all of this. Okay. My wife, she modeled a positive perspective about what God had called us to do. And I got to tell you, the mother is key to the perspective of the child. Hands
Mm.
down. Hands down. She is key. Now, she was complaining and her jaws are all tight about me being away, and how people are treating us and all this other kind of stuff. Then it may have been a different issue. It may have been
Yeah.
a different issue. So, but we did some things. When I was home, I traveled a lot, and when they were growing up, I was on staff with Campus Crusade Crew, and I was traveling, speaking of these university campuses. In those days, we didn't have a lot of budget, so I'd be gone for a long time. And I can remember, Dhati, many a night, waking up in some college town, in some motel in some college town in the middle of the night, just petrified that my kids would grow up to be bitter because I was away.
Hmm.
I mean, I can remember weeping and crying out to God, please, please don't let that happen. And God was gracious. God was gracious. And I think we did some things, though. We protected summer times as much as possible. The kids, all of us went together when I was speaking at conferences and things like that. They were there. We protected vacation times. When I was home, I made a decision that proved to be I haven't made too many smart decisions, but I made a decision when they were little that proved to be really good, a great decision. I limited accepted speaking engagements when I was at home here in Atlanta, and besides going to the office, I tried to be at their events and games and things like that as much as I possibly could. We had rhythms when our kids, especially the boys, when they turned 13 years old. We had a rite of passage ceremony with them
Hmm.
where they mentors that meant a lot to them in their lives spoke into their hearts and lives, and I would give them a Bible that I had studied from and preached from, and I'm doing that with my grandsons now. It was things like that. We had a tradition that we would take vacation just before they went back to school, and that week they had to write their goals out for the year
Okay.
and what they were believing God to do, because we tripped into something. As parents, we got to stop doing so much defensive parenting, and do offensive parenting. Um, and so we did things like that, but we also made a lot of mistakes too.
Yeah.
And
No.
and connect
I
with the
think that's
heart. Yeah,
encouraging.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
really encouraging just to hear. I mean, that, like, and I love what you were saying. They don't want perfect parents, but they want parents that they can, that is confessing and
yeah.
struggling well. And I think that's good. And so
Yeah.
now you're now parents of people in their 20s. You've parented in the teens, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. I won't say how old Brian is, but I know he's beyond his 40s now.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
but And I remember a time you talking to me, and I don't remember the exact words, but I remember you talked about like the 20s and the 40, between 20 and 40, that's kind of your
Yeah,
learning phase.
yeah,
And then
yeah, yeah,
your
yeah,
40s to your 60 was kind of your
yeah,
leveraging or your editing phase. And then your
yeah, yeah.
60s and to your 80s is kind of your, I forgot what you said, is it the leaving stage or kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
next
yeah.
generation? Like what advice, as you have kind of are moving through those different generations, how would you kind of help give the 20-year-old, the 30-year-old, the 40-year-old,
Yeah,
like what
yeah,
advice would you give in the stages?
yeah. So you got to know that although I've identified it, I wrote about this in my leadership book. Those three stages in an adult life. Um, let me just quickly say this. I typically don't like doing that kind of stuff because I think Christians just have this terrible habit of typecasting ourselves, and
Mhm,
and then we become self-fulfilling prophecies. And I think life is more fluid than that. And
mhm.
you know, however, it's been my observation that generally speaking, there's like this 3 20-year segments in an adult life. And um, and the first segment is from that period between 20 to roughly 40, is that season of learning. And what I mean by that, I don't mean that God's not using you. I don't mean that you're not making a great impact. I look at you and Brian and the rest. You guys were knocking it out of the park when you were in your late 20s and 30s. You're doing it. God was using you in a great way. But what I'm saying is that primarily, that's a season in your life where you can't rush things. You see, you can Google knowledge, but you can't Google experience.
That's good.
Uh, you can't Google wisdom. You just can't do it. And so God is forming a spiritual address through your life. And that's a season in your life where you have to be careful because everybody's obsessed with self actualization. When you're between your 20s and 40s, you're taking all these tests, this test, some Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, and all of this, and who am I, where do I fit, and this kind of thing. And your tendency is to prematurely typecast yourself. And that'll set you up for midlife crisis later
Mm.
on. And I think you have to chill. You have to chill and accept the reality that God can do more in the flesh than you can do in a lifetime of energy and effort. And the right around your late 30s or 40ish, right in there, you morph into the second phase. From 40 to 60 is that season of leveraging. And by that, what I mean is that you've gotten the snot knocked out of you between
Mhm,
your 20s
mhm,
and 40s. You've taken some hits, and lo and behold, you're still standing.
mhm.
And hopefully by this time, there's a healthy detachment, um, and a growing sense of gratitude about you. And you realize that gifts and abilities and talents are overrated.
Hmm.
And it's at that point where you can begin to step into um, seeing the fruit of your life. Your decisions take a little bit more of a little bit more nuance. They're marinated. They're flavored more.
Yeah.
And you know, probably at this point you're comfortable with who you are, but you're also comfortable with who you're not.
Yeah.
And that's when you become most fruitful. Now, the dangerous part of this season in your life, however, the dangerous part of this season is that you got to be careful because you can get addicted to success. You can get addicted to accomplishment. Um, if you're not careful, you can slip toward a little bit of entitlement,
Hmm.
and you got to watch it, and you got to kind of be careful of making assumptions about primary relationships here, because this is where the seeds of the disintegration of your marriage are more often than not sown. And so you got to pay attention to that. And then the last phase is that of leaving, and I don't necessarily mean leaving the ministry. Like, you get to your late 50s and 60s and beyond, you realize you got more out of the rearview mirror than you do in front of you, right? And by this time in your life, you should know the difference between a trend and a fad.
Yeah.
Uh, and by this time in your life, you should know what is noble. By noble, what I mean by that is that which is enduringly, refreshingly, always right. It's
Yeah.
always, it was right. It was right 5,000 years ago. It's going to be right 5,000 years ago. It's always right. And so you want to prepare a generation for a time that you cannot see. Hopefully, you've not grown bitter and angry and cynical and this kind of thing. You got to embrace this. And by the way, I'll just say this. I know I'm talking a lot here. This is a dangerous time. I've got colleagues of mine. I got colleagues of mine who are bitter and cynical.
Mm.
Um, and you got to watch. You got to watch this time in your life. Experience it has a double-edged sword. Experience can make you lazy, though.
Mm.
It can make you lazy. And you got to continue to grow during this season in your life. And just because you're at a quote patriarch phase, that doesn't mean that you should pull the car in the garage. It means that you should aggressively look for opportunities to put fresh wind in the sails of those who are coming behind you, and be intentional about building a floor for them to stand on and not a ceiling to restrict them. And but this is where so that's what I meant by
No,
those two things.
that's really good. I got so many questions. I mean, it was so good. Like, so, and I want, I guess I want to talk about one, and then I want to come back
Okay.
to talking about how did you endure through all the ups and downs and seasons. But can you talk a little bit about kind of what you're doing now? I mean, I know I looked
Yeah.
up a little bit about like beyond our generation and just kind of the work, and you talk about pouring into and how you haven't gotten lazy, but like you're intentionally pouring back.
Yeah. Well, so my life is a product of people who saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. When I was a young puppy in ministry, man. I was, in my late teens and early 20s. God raised up people to come alongside of me who again just saw things in me, opened doors for me, held me accountable. I mean, it's my whole life. We could do a whole podcast on that deal. So I've always had this sense in me that I wanted to give back, to do that. I mean, because it was just a huge blessing to me. And even at the church, we had residence programs and things like that where we started to do it. So as as I began to see that I didn't retire from the church because I was burnt out or any of that. I wasn't mad at anybody, wasn't burnt out or any of that thing. But I began to realize that okay, while I still have energy, uh, health, um, I need to take the goodness of God that's been implanted in me and people who've put me on their shoulders and turn around and do the same thing.
Yeah.
So that's where beyond our generation, I just want to put wind in the sails of emerging younger Christian leaders, and it's organic. I don't want to. I don't want to. When we started this, I said to my wife, I don't want to manage some organization. I don't. I've been running things for over 50 years. I don't want to get back into that.
Mhm.
But I mentor younger leaders. There's a group that I hang with, but then there are others that organically I will mentor and make myself available to them. I'm a visiting professor at like three seminaries. You do a semester in a week's time. You've done that before, and then I'm doing that. Then I'm speaking at strategic events and what have you, and I'm doing some writing. So that's
Is
that's what
there
we're all about.
is there a primary message? Like if you were to whittle down your message to a core desire or passion that you want this next generation or these generations to get, what would be that message?
It's all about urgency. The message would be you only have one life.
Yeah.
You got one shot at this thing. And none of us are getting out of here alive unless the Lord comes. And so each moment is a gift. And life is a great transition. You're here. Life is a brief moment in history, lies between two vast eternities. Every day of your life, you got to say, what am I doing with my moment?
Hmm.
And so it's all about responding to God during your moment in history, taking
Hmm.
the best that He's given to you and leveraging that. That's primarily what my heart is about, and that your life has got to tell the truth about the God that you represent. And you've got to be the portrait of the desired destination at which the culture and your family needs to arrive.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of
Yeah. And I've heard you talk about the difference between leadership development and leader development,
Yeah, yeah,
and as you're pouring into that generation, how
yeah.
can you explain how you differentiate those?
Yeah, yeah. Well, leadership development is terribly important. Leadership development has to do with the skills and the tools that a leader uses. You
Yeah.
know, planning and organizing and putting things out and raising resources and all of that kind of thing. Casting vision. There's a science and art to that, and that's really important. And the Bible talks about leadership development. Proverbs is there and all of that stuff. But by and large, uh, the overriding emphasis on leadership in the Bible has to do with character.
Yeah.
It has to do with who you are,
Yeah.
and that you gotta be worth following. It gets into the theology of incarnation, right? Everything in the Bible is incarnational. The peoples of God in the Old Testament, the nation of Israel, the visible. It's not that God was racist, but He wanted to raise up a people to show what a relationship with God is all about. The church, incarnational. So it is with leadership. Um, the only reason why leadership exists in the scriptures is because God wants something done in human history. It's all defined by assignment. But God wants to serve His meals on clean plates,
Hmm.
and that's the reason why the overarching passion in the Bible of great spiritual leaders is that their ambition is that their character is going to be greater than the platform that they stand on.
Yeah. That's good. Yep.
And so that's what we mean by leader
Right.
development. Yeah.
That's good. You would always talk to me. He says, "Don't let your giftings take you to a place your character can't keep you."
That's right,
I don't know if
exactly.
that was an original quote, but that's something that
No, it's not. And I
I
got to go back.
constantly credit you every time that I speak on it, because
No,
that is something that is dear to me, and I think it's important. Now, let's talk about that a little bit briefly in a few more minutes we have.
yeah.
Um, Man, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say that there's any time that's harder in history than other
Mhm.
time and periods, but one of the facts that we do know is that 38% of pastors who were pastoring before COVID are no longer pastoring now.
Yeah,
They're not
yeah,
pastoring at different churches; they're at different places. They're,
yeah, yeah.
and if you just talk about the last cycles that we've had in the election cycles, like the division, the divisiveness of the church, the separation, everybody seems like they're colonizing or what is that? I'm
Deconstructing.
deconstructing. Like,
Yeah.
so this is like we're in a period where it just seems tough to
Hmm.
pastor, tough to lead. And I'm just reminded of Second Timothy. Paul is trying to encourage young Timothy to remain, to stay faithful. But
Yeah,
Paul
yeah,
also seems very tired and fatigued,
yeah,
right? He
yeah,
says, I've
yeah,
run my
yeah,
race, I've fought the good fight,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
In there, talk a little bit about that and how, like, if you were to encourage pastors like me and even younger than me that are just struggling, right? They're like, people have left them, that people that thought was going to ride with them for a long time are no longer there. And not only are they no longer there, they seem like they're now their sworn enemies,
Hmm.
discrediting the ministry. People, just like, how, what would your encouragement be to pastors that are currently dealing with the animosity, the tension, the distrust of the institution of the church, the institution of the office,
Hmm. Hmm.
that's taking place right now currently in the evangelical church?
Well, you quoted Second Timothy, and I've been preaching a lot on Second Timothy when I talk to younger pastors because the whole message of Second Timothy is one word: resilience.
Hmm.
Resilience. Now, look. Um, there, there's so many ways that we can go at this thing here. The truth of the matter is, there there's always been a hell ride season for the church. You know, um, there's always been forces coming up against the church. Um, the church in many parts of the world has been going through hellacious
Hmm.
persecution and pressure and all of that stuff. Um, by and large, we've had a little safe ride up until the craziness of the last political stuff and the George Floyd stuff and all of that. We've had a little bit, and so we've had the liberty to sort of brand ourselves and move toward this. And I think God, there's two ways of looking at it. God has allowed this pressure to come.
Hmm.
God has allowed this pressure to come, and it is painful, and we need help, and we need encouragement. We need to link arms, and yet at the same time, it's almost like when you read Second Timothy, Dhati, the thing that strikes me about Second Timothy, that letter from Paul, is that Paul doesn't coddle Timothy.
Hmm.
You read
Yeah.
it. He doesn't coddle him. He doesn't coddle him at all. Nero's is killing folks, turning the heat on Christians. Paul's going to die, and Timothy's at that church in Ephesus, and then they're beating the snot out of him. They're taking his lunch money, man. And yet, when you read that, he begins in chapter 1 by saying, "Hey, look, Timothy, all that you bring to your calling is who you are." And he tells him 4 things in those 7 verses. You're loved and valued, right? You have a legacy of faith. And oh, by the way, you have a spiritual gift. And number 4, you have supernatural resources.
It's good.
So I think this is a time for us to encourage one another, but it's also a time for us to understand that with the call of God comes opposition and pressure and pain. And it's hard, and we need to support one another, love one another. And at the same time, we need to ask ourselves a question. Why are we in this thing?
Yeah.
Is it a gig? Is it a profession? Do we want to just cultivate a brand? What are we doing?
Yeah.
Or has God laid his hand on you to do this? Now, again, I mean, I'm not being mean or cruel. I think we need to wrap our arms around one another. We need to pour into one another. But I actually think in the long run, although the devil's been raising all kinds of Cain with the church, over the long run, I think God is purifying us.
That's good.
It's a perspective. We needed to be edited. And we need a sense of identity. Who are we and why are we doing this stuff? So yeah.
Man, we can go on and on. This
Yeah.
is this rich, this is good, this is what is needed. We got to bring you back on later just to talk more about, because it is so hard. Like I just feel like even for me, it was just so much. Is like, when Lord, I'll do anything. If I didn't feel like the Lord, like what you said, if I didn't feel called, I was
don't do
looking
this.
for
No, yeah.
coaching jobs. I was looking for teaching jobs. I was looking for anything besides this. And
That's right.
you just had some years where you're just, you're not going to get appreciated. You're not going to all of this. And it's not this woe is me thing. It's just hard. It's just hard. And I've seen so many people fall away. And so I really do appreciate your encouragement. I appreciate like even what you're saying, resilience, right? That's the message of Second Timothy that God is calling us. And thank you for living a life of resilience. And I know that you will completely give all credit to the Lord in your. And you've talked about spiritual leadership and staying close to the Spirit through it all. So I'm just so grateful for you. Thank you for
thank
joining,
you, my brother.
and I appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Loritts.
Same here, my brother.